Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Alain. I'm drinking out of a coffee because punching you in the face is illegal mug because choking somebody doesn't hurt them as bad. So instead of coffee because punching, I've done sleeper holds because I didn't want to punch a guy. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, chokes and sleeper holds and a little bit about the law. And as you can see, I have a special guest today, Nick Hughes. Nick is a fellow author and friend of mine. If you haven't bought this book yet, you really ought to. You can find it at Amazon. An awful lot of great information on keeping yourself safe. Nick's been on before, and I wanted him back today because he has a lot of practical experience when it comes to chokes and sleeper holds, working the doors and different places he's worked. Nick, for people that might not know you, you want to give just a brief introduction, a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. I started martial arts with the school judo club before Bruce Lee was a thing. You tell them you're doing judo and people thought it was Chinese food. They had no idea. Bruce Lee came 5-6 years after I got started and the worldwide boom of martial arts happened. And I left the judo club. We cross-trained with wrestlers and boxers all in the same gym at school, ended up in a karate system that had zero sporting application. A lot of people don't understand that back then there wasn't as much sport martial arts as there is now. It was all self-defense. The sport stuff came later. So I ended up in a karate school. The guy used the karate school as a vehicle to furnish his staff for a security company that was nationwide. So we ran all the nightclubs, all the crowd control, rock concerts, and ultimately bodyguarded all the rock stars in the world and still do. From there, I left and joined the French Foreign Legion. I taught unarmed combat there. Stationed in a bunch of different countries later on as a bodyguard. So I worked in 21 countries, and everywhere I went, I would find the local martial arts and train with them. And so to date, I've got black belts in every Japanese martial art you can get a black belt in. Dabbled in Wing Chun, Filipino martial arts, traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, aikido, Filipino stuff, military unarmed combat, pretty much all of it. If it's out there and it's functional, I've done it.
I'm glad you mentioned your judo background because I first started in judo in the 80s when I was in high school. And that's when I was first choked out. And I was too stubborn to tap, so I was out.
Yep.
And the referee stops it, and I came to thinking, holy man, that I was helpless. I want to get good at those. And that's what led me to really train on those.
Yep.
But when we're talking about these, it was interesting that I just recently read in one of my judo books, that author claimed that in 120 years of judo practice, where people are being choked out continuously all the time, never a fatality.
No, we have a ton of stuff to unpack with this today. So I've mentioned this to you before. Back in those days, when you got your black belt, the tradition was in judo. So you and I in the judo club, and we got our black belt together. I would choke you out, right? And I shouldn't say choke. That's the wrong word. I would put you in a sleeper. You'd pass out. I would revive you with the Japanese art of resuscitation called katsu. And then you'd return the favor, and then we'd all go out and drink sake and get drunk. And I trained with a guy in Aikido who was absolutely amazing. His name was Rodney Grantham, and sadly, he's passed away. That guy was the first Occidental to get a black belt in judo in the Kodokan, right, in Japan, alongside of Don Drager, who a lot of longtime martial artists will know who Don Drager is. And Rodney got his black belt with him, and they did that to each other. They choked each other out. And yeah, there's never been a fatality. Now, to back that up, there's a recent study, and if people want to get the link, reach out to you and I can put it in the chat later on or whatever. Think it was Wake Forest did a study on the efficacy and safety of vascular restraints. They've deemed there's absolutely no danger whatsoever. And then Force Science, I think it was, did a study with cops, 85,000 police officers trained in this. 14,000 of them went all the way to where they're choked out completely. Not a single recorded fatality or injury from any of that.
Yeah, and that's I have, and I guess real quick, because you mentioned it, the difference between a choke or what they call a sleeper hold. Choke is you're restricting the airway.
Yes.
A sleeper hold, you're restricting the blood flow to
Blood
the
flow.
brain by pressure on the carotid arteries.
Yes.
Everyone that I have put unconscious, or the times that I have used it in real life situations, it's always been the carotid artery,
Yes.
restrict the blood flow, and they go woozy and out, and really
Exactly.
quick.
Yep.
And I have done that because it was easier and safer. I didn't, if I hit the guy, I caused more damage. If I could spin him, put the hold on, put him out in the confrontation, nobody was hurt.
Yep.
And so I did it on people that I did not want to hurt, but I needed to stop them. And so, but that's, the difference with it, when sometimes we say choke,
and
but we really
this
are
is
talking about the vascular restraint.
Yeah, but this is why we have to unpack more stuff. So the first thing I want to mention, because I know there'll be martial artists listening to this, if you listen to Greg Elefritz, he made a really good point years ago. He said, any instructor, if he's worth his salt, ask him, what have you changed your mind about 5 years? And if the guy says nothing, run, right? Good instructors are always staying on top of what's going on and researching, and they change their stuff all the time. They don't get bogged down because this is the way we've always done it crap. And one of the things I came to terms with, I for years was guilty of this. I'm teaching martial arts and telling people it's self-defense. And I've now come to realize those two are completely different. So if we take the martial arts pie, if you think of it as a pizza, one slice is punching, another slice is kicking, another slice is throwing, another slice is grappling. There's a slice for knife fighting, there's a slice for stick fighting, there's a slice for guns, right? It's all about fighting, hence the term martial, right, which comes from military. When we look at self-defense, we're teaching things like, how do we avoid getting in trouble in the first place? What about tactical medicine? What about legal ramifications? What about verbal de-escalation? Recognizing pre-attack cues? And only one slice is devoted to fighting skills. And so I want to make that distinction, right? Because when we go into the sport world, which has now become prolific, like I said, when I trained in martial arts, there was no sport. You fought one another at judo, all right, 100%. You went all out, but it wasn't for a cup or a trophy. It was their equivalent of sparring at the end of class. Sport came much, 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 much later. And now we have this division. And again, the sports guys all try and tell their students, right, we're teaching you self-defense. They're not. One of the problems is, I guarantee you, if you went into 99.9% of all the Brazilian jiu-jitsu and judo clubs across this country and MMA schools and asked them, what is anoxic brain injury and how long can you put a sleeper on someone before there's the risk of brain damage, which comes first, and then death comes later. Brain damage comes from the amount of brain cells dying because they're starved of oxygen, right? Once you reach a certain amount, you're going to have brain damage. And if you go beyond that, enough die that the person dies, right? I guarantee you, if you went into 99% of those schools and said, what is that time, right? They couldn't tell you. Now, it's not entirely a criticism because they don't really need to know in a sporting environment, because you already mentioned this, right? You got choked out. So the second you're choked out, the referee pulled the guy off you, right? And you come to a couple of seconds later. So one of two things is going to happen in an MMA fight or a judo match or jiu-jitsu. One of two things will happen. Your opponent will tap before he passes out, or he'll play hard man and he'll get choked out. And either way, a couple of seconds later, it's released. The problem is now you go out, and we've seen this with the guy, I can't remember his name, the Marine in New York last year that got charged with...
Penny. Yeah, he was just acquitted. Yep.
But he was, acquitted, great. But how much did the legal fees cost him? He's locked up. He's been charged. I mean, it's a nightmare to go through. Yeah. All the public court of opinion, et cetera, et cetera. That guy's going to be carrying that for the rest of his life.
Yep.
I guarantee no one ever told that guy, because the clip I saw, he had the guy in the sleeper hold on the floor of the train, and one of the commuters, black guy, was sitting next to him on the ground, and he said, "Man, I think you can let him go. Like he's out." And he said, "No, I'm holding him till the cops come." Obviously, no one's told that guy what that time limit is. And by the way, for your listeners, it's 4 minutes. And I've always told my students 3 minutes to add that 1 minute safety window, right? And there is no need to do it for that length of time, but you should know, right? How long can I put this on safely before there's a risk that I'm going to make this guy a vegetable or kill him? Sport guys don't need to know it, and they're not being told it. Now, that guy goes out and gets in a bar fight and sticks that on someone like this guy did, right? In a situation in the real world, I'll just hold him till the cops come. Well, the guy dies as a result. And again, if you're teaching self-defense, you need to teach your students that. And if you're teaching sport, I think you still should, but you get why they don't understand, why they don't know that number.
Yeah, I mean, when I have ever used them for real, as soon as the guy goes limp, I have let off the pressure, but kept my arm ready just in case I had to control the person.
Yep. Here's some of the stuff that comes from real world application. And I probably put this on, I would guess, 300 to 400 times in the real world, right? Never had a problem with it. There are a couple of things I figured out. One, when you release the guy, we call it a reflex strangle, meaning when I release, so what you're essentially doing, just so we understand the mechanics, right? The heart's pumping, and it's pumping oxygenated blood up into the brain. We take what's called a sleeper. And when we do it properly, the crook of the elbow is lined up, point of the elbow is lined up with the sternum, which makes the crook of the elbow line up with the trachea, right? And now my biceps on one side are compressing the carotids, and my forearm extensor muscles on the other side. And that's like taking a garden hose and crimping it, right? The water stops flowing. Well, in this case, the oxygenated blood stops flowing and you black out. You can also have something called a red out, by the way, which a lot of people don't know. That's when you get too much blood into the brain. This happens, SF guys who jump with oxygen, high altitude. We had one in the Legion. His pack came off. It was attached on one leg only, and it was whipping him around in the air like an astronaut in one of those G-force testers, right? And he had a red out. So there's so much blood being forced into his brain, he blacks out. Fortunately, he had an automatic opener and it popped his chute. His eyeballs the white of his eyes were red for the next 3 or 4 weeks. All the blood vessels had burst in them. So yeah, blackout happens. We stop the oxygenated blood from getting to the brain. Well, just like the garden hose, right? If you uncrimp it, the water starts flowing. And one of the things that catches people who learn this stuff in theory, so you get a lot of cops who are taught this in theory at an academy, is they put it on someone, the guy goes unconscious, and they now put him on the ground and forget about him and go grab the other guy, not realizing that 2 to 3 seconds after you took the guy out, he's coming awake. Another thing we've noticed is that they will come awake doing whatever they were doing when you put him to sleep. So if that guy was throwing punches, right, and you put the sleeper on him, when the oxygenated blood comes back up, the electrical synapses are still firing in the brain, right, with punches. So he'll come to doing whatever he was doing when you choked him out. So again, enough people aren't taught all this stuff. So things like that catch them by surprise. And that's why I can tell immediately talking to you, yes, he's the real deal, because you said, yeah, I keep my hand there because I know when I release, there's a potential for them to come back firing on all cylinders. So you got to be ready for that.
I want to address a question. We got Dixon asked a question. He says, "Hi, Nick. I understand that people high on certain drugs are more susceptible to cratering when choked than a normal healthy person. How about you? What are your thoughts on that?"
Yeah, so again, a lot to unpack here. I want to touch on why we can see fatalities with the sleeper holds, and that ties into this. One of the problems was, let's go back to the judo guys, right? How fit are the judo guys that are choking each other out when they get their black belts, right? They are an Olympic level judoka is up in, I read a study once, the top 5 most highly conditioned athletes in the world. They're up there with biathletes and triathletes. And their heart rate goes up to phenomenal rates during competition in an Olympic match. And they're incredibly fit and healthy. So when you put this on, and they're typically what age, right? They're 18 to 25. So when you put one of these on somebody that age, of course, we're not going to see fatalities. They're fit and they're healthy. The problem we see in law enforcement, and there's a bunch of problems we see in law enforcement, this, which again, we have to unpack as we go along. But one of the problems is, yes, we're not dealing with someone who's in particularly good shape. He can also be under the influence of alcohol and certain drugs. And if the drug is making his heart rate accelerate, and then you dump adrenaline on top of that, all right, and the guy is not in shape, that's like taking your Yugo out and redlining it, right, versus taking a Ferrari out and redlining it, right? You're going to have a problem with the Yugo engine. So we get a guy who's on drugs like this, and the adrenaline is raging, and he's older maybe, or he's way out of shape, and you stick this on him. What happens next in law enforcement, and this is where I think the chokehold gets the blame when it's not the choke, is what does the cop do next? He cuffs the guy. So he rolls the guy on his belly and he puts the cuffs on. Well, that causes something they call positional asphyxiation. So we had a thing, I don't know if Americans did this. It was, I forget what we called it in Australia. I heard over here it was going around social media. It was called the knockout game. I think it preceded the kids eating the Tide Pods. But you'd run around school and you would take 10 really big, deep breaths. You'd hyperventilate, right? And then you'd put a bear hug on yourself and squeeze, and you blacked out and you hit the ground, right? So we'd run around school. Hey, check this out. You and boom, and everyone would laugh. And kids were doing it all over school. Again, no fatalities, right? Someone revived it. Like I said, they revived it here recently and called it the knockout game. So when you take a guy whose heart rate is now hammering at 180 beats to 220 beats, and you've just choked him out, you slam cuffs on him and leave him face down, right? He can't breathe. His heart's being compressed just like we do in that thing. And one of the problems now is, what does the system do when it knows it's dying? It fights. And so that guy starts struggling even more. Now, what do the cops do? Oh my God, he's resisting. Look, he's fighting back, and they pile on. And now the guy dies, right? So you have a lot of deaths from positional asphyxiation that are attributed to, now they do an autopsy and they go, oh, he's full of meth, right? Ergo, it was the meth that killed him. Or, oh, I put a sleeper on him right before we did that. Oh, it must have been the sleeper that killed him, right? And all the cop has to do is put the cuffs on the guy, then roll him on his side. And they're not doing that, right? The academies aren't, the guys at the academy, God bless them, right? They're hamstrung by what they're allowed to teach. They've got a condensed program. They don't give these guys nearly enough time, and they rush them through. The cop doesn't remember under the pressure out there in the real world. He doesn't remember all the stuff he's supposed to do. I have a mate of mine who's a U.S. Marshal. He said the other day one of his guys was trying to put cuffs on a guy that they thought was trying to grab a gun while he was face down. The guy had forgot that he double locked his handcuffs the last time he had a suspect in him, and he'd forgot to set them again. So here's a guy, the creme de la creme of law enforcement, is trying to put locked up handcuffs on the guy, and he's stuck in a loop and they're not working and he can't figure it out. So the cop now puts this guy in this position face down with his hands cuffed behind him. Remember the case in New York where the cop put a seatbelt on a guy? And again, for those that don't know, a seatbelt has got no restriction anywhere. It literally comes across from one shoulder across under your armpit on the other side. And the journalists, again, who don't know a thing about what they report, they just want to induce fear-mongering and negativity, said, oh, they choked him to death, right? They didn't know it was a seatbelt. There's no choking involved. There's no windpipe involved.
Explain that seatbelt technique. Explain that seatbelt technique a little bit more for people that don't know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about, but some people might be thinking a car seatbelt. Make sure you.
It's a control and restraint technique that police academies worked on, where they purposely took the chokehold was taken away. 24 police departments as of 2021 have banned sleeper holds. And again, it's ill-informed stupidity. We'll talk about that in a sec. So the cops came up with, well, I've got a guy fighting another guy. I've got to come up behind and restrain him. So I will pass, for example, my right hand over his right shoulder, and my left arm will come up underneath his left arm, and I'll join my hands in the front. So my arms are going across his body in exactly the position a seatbelt would go across his body. And then you pull the guy away, right? And you're safe because you're tucked in behind him. And he's safe because there's no restriction on blood vessel or throat. Well, they got that guy. That little cop grabbed him from behind, twisted him around and threw him to the ground. Then they dogpiled him and put the cuffs on. The guy's massively overweight. I forget, he's over 300 pounds. And you got 3 or 4 cops sitting him on the floor trying to hold him down. And of course, he starts fighting because he's face down and can't breathe. They keep dogpiling on him to hold him. Guy dies. Oh, the cop choked him. Right? The cop didn't choke him. And I don't know who the guy's attorney was. And I don't know who their expert witnesses were. The guy was not choked. All right. And again, choking is the restriction of the windpipe. So the guy can't breathe. Interestingly enough, the Red Cross, all my instructors go through their training every year. The Red Cross reports that when you approach someone who's choking in a restaurant, right, that is the only situation where, as a Red Cross trained person, you don't ask for permission to administer first aid. Red Cross teachers, right? I got some guy on the ground bucking around, or he's fainted and he's sitting up. I go, hey, I've been trained by the Red Cross. Do you mind if I help you? And you get confirmation verbally, yes, that would be okay, right? The only time you don't do that, someone's choking in a restaurant, you're going to do the Heimlich. You can't ask them because they can't answer because they're choking. Now, that comes straight from the Red Cross. So how was that guy saying, I can't breathe, if he was being choked, right? By definition, he couldn't have. So he wasn't choked. But again, the journalists jump all over it, trying to inflame everybody because that's their business, right? That's how they sell their stuff. So you got that problem. And then you have police departments who are now I read a study, LA, was out in California, and guys have died, right? Again, after being put in the vascular neck restraint, who've been on meth, and now they get into arguments in courts of law because both sides bring in their medical expert. And one guy's saying it was the meth that killed him. Another guy, no, it was the sleeper. And yet another one saying, no, it was positional asphyxiation. All right. So.
And that's something I read recently. I read one of the articles I read with the Penny case there in New York. They could not determine exactly what killed that person. They could not say that the hold that he was in was the cause of death because there were other things going on. Yep,
exactly. Yeah, mate, it's a major problem. Now, here we come into some other stuff we have to talk about. So those 21 department or 24 departments that have been banned, and there's probably more now, no federal officer is allowed to use them anymore. All right. And that's because this was great. I was reading the study back in 20 when it came out. Federal politicians decided that it was dangerous and therefore banned it for all federal agents. And I'm like, what medical training have federal politicians have, right, to determine that this is a safe or a non-safe move? And then there was a guy who was one of the high-ups in the NAACP said, I don't care whether you call it a choke or a vascular restraint. Anytime you put your arms around someone's neck, it's a chokehold. Again, not a doctor, not a legal expert, not a martial artist, just some ass clown that's decided it's all choking someone. And it isn't. Right? Choking by definition is the airflow is restricted. Vascular restraint is the oxygenated blood, and it's painless. And my fear is that when you take this tool away from law enforcement, because it's like you said, right? When I'm bouncing, I have to be very concerned. I can drill that guy and knock him out, which probably means I'm going to break his jaw, right? It almost always means he's poleaxed when he hits the ground and there's a risk of a brain bleed, right? And then there's the cops turn up and now he has injuries. So there's a potential for a criminal charge and also a civil charge, right? Which is the worst of the two because the burden of proof is lower and they can get you up to 3 years afterwards. I can spin that guy around and put the sleeper on him and he wakes up 2 seconds later outside sitting on the bus stop.
He doesn't have a mark on him, right? And this is what I would ask. This is what I would ask the federal politicians and the NAACP guy. I give you a choice, right? You can be bitten by a canine. You can be shot. You can be cracked across the skull or the kneecap with a nightstick. I'm going to spray you with OC. I'll tase you, or I'll put a vascular restraint on you. Which one would you pick?
Exactly. Yes.
Right? I don't want, when you take that away from a cop, right? Now he's left with, that's all he's got left, right? He's bat utility belt. Well, I'll tase you. I'll pull my nightstick out and crack your skull. I'll spray OC. I'll sick my dog on you, or I'll shoot you, right? I would much rather, please, like, just slip round behind me and stick the sleeper on. Thanks. I'll take that one. Because 2 seconds later, I'm going to wake up. It doesn't hurt. I'm cuffed. I'm sitting in the back of the car and I go, well, that was fun, right? Or I've got half my calf muscle chewed off. My skull's fractured, right? I can't breathe or see, right? It's nonsense. And I'd love to go up to the feds and go, okay, gentlemen, you took that away from them, so let's go. You pick which one of these options you want left. So in Charlotte recently, 8 of our council members are leftists. So they banned the use of tear gas. They've told the police department they can't use it because some of them went down and wanted to jump in and, you know, get some publicity and go with the protesters. So they walked into the clouds of tear gas and it bothered them. So they said, you can't use that stuff anymore. And I'm like, so when the next riot breaks out, what riot control methods do we have left? We don't have water cannon in this country. And now you're not allowed to use OC. So what we've seen this before, right? It's police dogs and nightsticks. Again, I'd rather have the gas, but on top of that one, I'd rather have the damn choke. It's stupid.
Exactly. And I've always said that because, I mean, I can stop somebody without me getting hurt, without them getting hurt. And when you take that away, there's a greater risk of both.
Well, and here's another thing to factor in, right? We've got 120-pound police women trying to arrest a guy my size. I'm 6'8" and 280 pounds. And again, I'm rolling around with her partner on the ground. She could jump on. This is what I love about sleepers. And you're a fellow martial artist. So I was sitting there one night going, what technique that we all learn, and no matter what art you've done, what technique is guaranteed 100% of the time that if you apply it correctly, it's going to work, right? Well, groin kicks don't.
Nope.
I've been kicked in the pods in fights and I keep fighting, and I've kicked people in the pods and they keep fighting, right? Thigh kicks don't. Right crosses, left hooks, uppercuts, elbows, headbutts don't. I've been stabbed 13 times during my career. That didn't stop me, right? I know people who've been shot. Read Cirillo's book about the guy whose heart was shredded and they keep fighting, right? So I know guys who've fallen out of planes at 30,000 feet and landed in snowdrifts in the forest and got up and walked away. People have been run over by cars and survived it. I'm not aware of anyone that if you put them in a sleeper and you crunch it on, that doesn't go to sleep. Right? I'm unaware of it. I don't know. Maybe somewhere. And I've seen one guy said, oh, no, they got this guy in an MMA. And then you look at it. A lot of MMA fighters don't do it properly, by the way.
If it's not put on properly.
No,
you know, some people, they got it on, they're putting it on the trap or something.
And the elbow, you can always tell. The elbow's in front of one of the pectoral muscles instead of being on the sternum.
Right. Instead of putting the pressure on the neck.
Yeah. So I would love someone to argue with me about it or come up and go, no, there is a guy I know you can't choke him out. If you put that damn thing on, now I know some of the jiu-jitsu guys, it takes a little longer because an untrained person half chokes himself, because when you put it around his neck, he panics and he tenses. So he's blocking off all those little capillaries by the fact that his muscles locked up. And someone who's good at judo or jiu-jitsu, right, they relax. So you've got to get a lot deeper to get them. But I'm unaware of any of them will claim I cannot be choked unconscious in a sleeper hole. So you've got a 120-pound policewoman with her partner rolling around on the floor. She could jump on that guy's back and sink that sleeper in, and the guy's woozy, like you said, in a couple of seconds. Now they can dominate and get the cuts on. and he goes away. No injuries again. What's her alternative otherwise? And we've all seen those clips of the ineffective partner standing there. What they can't shoot. They don't want to spray because they're both going to get sprayed. They don't want to tase at that point because they're not sure that one of the barbs is going to miss the guy and hit their partner. Right? What's left to them? Right? Nothing. So they sit there flapping their hands like, get off him, and ineffective. Again, if they could jump on the guy's back and put the sleeper on, it'd all be over in 3 seconds. So you're taking a tool that is, according to the Wake Medical Study, and again, anyone wants it, I'll send it to you. This is the top medical guys in the world who researched this thing extensively, looked at all the studies, all the police reports, everything, deemed it is not dangerous at all to a healthy person.
I'd definitely like a copy of that as well, because I don't think I've read that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll stick it on that Facebook page too. It's worth reading. And again, I don't know again, right? I'd have to follow up with the doctor, and I may do this. Did you factor in, right, the guy being on drugs and the face down being cuffed afterwards? Because here's another problem. LAPD years ago, one of the instructors, I met this cop at a PPCT conference, and he said, "Oh, they showed us this version where you have your hand on the back of the guy's neck, but instead of passing your other arm around his throat, you put your nightstick across the front." Right? So you run a nightstick, like 36-inch hickory nightstick across the front into the crook of your arm, and you put your other hand on the back of the head, and now you apply this. Well, that crushes the windpipe. Mm-hmm. Right? The guy dies, and this actually happened in 3 or 4 cases, right? The windpipe is crushed, the guy dies. Now, the cop doing his use of force report says, "I used the sleeper they taught me." He doesn't say with the nightstick, right? He just said, "I used a sleeper that I learned in the academy." And they go, "Well, that's clearly dangerous. No more using sleepers. It crushes windpipes," right? No one looked far enough to find out that the guy did it with a damn nightstick across. That, again, is not a sleeper.
In Hapkido, we have both cane and Don Bond techniques where we do use them across the windpipe, and those are extremely painful. But we got the ones where you put it across the carotid too, which are safer and quicker to put them unconscious. Yes. Across the throat are more painful.
And now we're back to another problem, right? Go back to the judo black belts. How long have those guys been training? 3 to 5 years, 4 nights a week, doing this thing over and over and over and over again. Now you get a cop. How much training does he get? Depending on his department, a day, 4 hours, 40 hours, 10 hours. What? It's not enough. And now, because he's got to learn the law, and he's got to learn driving skills and how to handle a crime scene and verbal de-escalation, radio procedure, report writing, all that crap, right? So they give him this tiny little piece of useless finger twisty wrist bullshit. And then they go, "By the way, you have this," and they show the guy how to do it. And they don't show him properly, and he never practices it again. And now, a year later, he's out in a fight, and he slams that on somebody, does it wrong. His elbow's over here. He's crushing the guy's windpipe. The guy's struggling. The guy dies. And again, he puts that in his report. "I used the sleeper thing that you taught me at the academy." Well, you didn't, right? You used a botched up version of it that you were shown that you never mastered. And now we have a problem, so let's blame the technique. Heaven forbid we should blame the department. I mean, this is a sort of pervasive shit that happens with police. Raleigh, and it's not the same chief anymore. This was years ago when I first got to the States, 94-ish. They'd gone through the pressure point control stuff, right, with Siddle, and they'd learned the thumb under the jawbone, the mandibular, whatever it is, as a vehicle extraction technique. And they're all like, great. And they pull this guy over who's drunk, and he refuses to get out of the car. So they did this on him, and a guy shoots out the window like toothpaste out of a tube, and they cuff him up. Well, he turns out to be, right, some rich asshole who's friends with the police chief and the mayor, and they're all at the same country club. So he calls the police chief up the next day and bitches that he was manhandled, right? No cameras at that point. So it's his word against the officers. Right. So he said, "They really hurt me. I had trouble chewing my cornflakes this morning, right? My jaw is like massively painful." I saw the memo. The guy who was training them sent me a copy of the memo, and he said, "Look at this shit. The police chief had said you are no longer allowed to use the thumb under the jaw, and this is quoting verbatim, because it hurts people. It's pain compliance, you moron. Pain compliance. What are you not understanding about the terminology? It's English. Pain compliance. I will force you to comply because if it doesn't, it hurts. And so this guy told the chief it really hurt. And the chief said, you can't do those anymore. They hurt. I'm like, oh my God. Right. That's what the cops are up against. I now know why so many, it's not a career choice anymore for a lot of people. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I deal with that, when I'm working with Reflex Protect, because, talking about the CS spray and stuff. And I'm like, it's just, and people will, it might not be safe for this. It's as safe as anything we have designed to cause intense pain to stop people from doing bad things.
Yes.
That's why we've been using it for 100 years.
Yes. Yeah, well, see, here's some other problems too, and I'm going to be getting into this in more detail with a former student of mine who's now touring the law enforcement circuit, working on their mindset. And he sent me a clip the other day. He goes, look at this, and there's this cop standing on a street corner somewhere, young kid, angry black guy comes down and confronts him and then slams him, punches him in the face and shoves him on his ass. And we have this thing now in law enforcement called taser dependency, right? Now that's an able-bodied young cop in his 20s. This guy hits him in the face. He doesn't see it coming. All the signs are there. Doesn't see it coming. Ends up on his ass. Chases the guy and pulls out his taser and tases him, right? And all the other cops dogpile the guy. And we now have a generation of kids that aren't fighting anymore. So I got a mate of mine joining the police force right now. And one of the questions was, have you ever been in a fight when you were in school? And he wrote down, yeah, one. And they're grilling him about it. They want a written thing like what happened, why were you in a fight? I grew up with what we call social violence, which I've always argued is an absolutely integral part of a male's upbringing, right? We go to school, we're a pack animal, we get into that pack, and now we have to establish a hierarchy, and we do that by fighting. And our friends come and watch. That's one of the key requirements of social violence. Got to have an audience. And we go down behind the bike shed, right? And you sit there and trade punches with one another. No one ever gets hurt. I mean, occasionally, yes, someone will fall down, hit their head, whatever. But the worst you get is the split lip, the blood nose, the black eye. It's all superficial. If you overstep that mark, if you knock that kid on the ground and then you went to kick him, right, the crowd will let you know that's unacceptable, right? There'll be a murmur in the crowd. You turn around and look, like, what, too much? Oh, yeah, you don't do that, right? Oh, okay. And we learned what those rules are, right? And we also got educational beatdowns by the males in the family if you overstepped the mark. And you look at, I saw a study the other day, it was mind-boggling. Over 90% of all the kids in prison are raised by single moms, right? There's no male influence anymore. And we've brought them up in this school system where there's what they call zero tolerance. I think is the laziest piece of bullshit I've ever heard in my life, because all the teachers are doing is, we don't want to deal with it. We're taking away your child's right to self-defense. No one can fight, we'll punish you both. Well, that's like I go and rape that school commissioner who came up with that idea. I go and rape his wife. If you apply zero tolerance to that, she's going to go to prison and so am I. Right? That's nonsensical. And they would argue that's ridiculous, but that's what you're doing to the kid. A bully comes up and punches the kid in the face. That kid defends himself, and now he's suspended along with the bully. Right? You've taken away my child's right to self-defense. You've also raised a generation of kids that have never been in a fight. And now you put them through the academy and give them a uniform and send them into a part of town where all those kids grew up fighting. And then they can tell in a heartbeat. They know it and they sense it. And those kids are scared. And when you've got a scared guy who's supposed to go and interact with someone who's not afraid, right? He now starts pulling his gun out. It's overreacting panic, right? So it's taser dependency. And this is why I think we're seeing so many shootings that are questionable. I know we're going overtime here, but there was one in Charlotte, very famous case 2 years ago, They charged the cop within 24 hours with murder, which is unheard of. Normally there's a big investigation before they come up with a finding. But kid was driving home, lost control of his car, by all accounts hit a tree or something, split his head, got out of the car, stumbled up to someone's house at 11 o'clock and started pounding on the door to get help. Tragedy of errors, the woman in the house downstairs calling 911 saying there's this big black guy, pounding on my door. 911 operators relays that as the guy's trying to break the door down, right? Because the woman said it sounds like he's trying to break the door down, he's trying to break the door down. So the first cop rolls up, 2 roll up immediately behind him. The kid sees them, turns around and starts running across the yard at them. And the cop pulls his gun out and shoots him. And I was sitting there talking to one of my mates about it. And I said, I think of all the times bouncing. So I started when I was 16 in a strip club. So all of our fights were against multiple opponents, right? Because when you get married, all the guys from the car dealership, all the guys from the shipyard, all the guys from the construction crew come out on your stag party. And so you've got anywhere from 5 to 25 guys sitting in a table, and then they cause trouble. And we go to say, you got to leave. Well, there's 20 of us and there's 3 of you, and it's on, right? And those were the odds. I've had very few single fights. It was almost always multiples. And I'm thinking of the amount of times these guys were coming back, and we get into arguments on the door like, hey, check this out. No, it's not your turn, right? You got the last guy. It's me. No bullshit. What about the guy you got upstairs a minute ago? This one's on me. That would have, if I'd been a cop that night with 2 of my students who are cops, it would have been literally, check this out. And no, you got the last one. And we would have been running out there, right? Side kick him, foot sweep him, throw him, wrist lock, clothesline, whatever. But that guy wouldn't have been shot. But you got a guy that's never been in a fight, doesn't know how to control someone, doesn't know how to control his fear. He's going to pull his damn tools out and start flapping. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was a kid, not only did I fight, I got paddled by principals for fighting,
yes.
Which they were allowed to do back then.
Well, we called it quadruple trouble. So the teacher who saw it would clip us over the ear and say, get to the headmaster. The headmaster would cane us. He would call my mom. Right. I'd come home. She'd go, get to your room. There's no afternoon tea and you're not going out to play. Wait for your father to go home. I'm like, hang on a minute. Been hit by the teacher, caned by the headmaster. No afternoon tea, no play. And the old man would come home and you'd pretend to be asleep, right? And he goes, I know you're pretending. Wake up. And he'd pull his belt out and I'd get slapped across the ass with his belt. I'm like, how is this fair? Right? But that was the system. And every kid grew up in that. And, you got in the fight, your dad, if you got beaten, your old man took you, if he knew how to box, which most of them did, they'd put you in the backyard like, this is what you do. Here's how you go get him. Right? And this was all regulated like men. Right. And now that whole system, right, the pendulum swung so far to this woke crap that we're not doing that anymore. And they start screaming toxic masculinity. And I'm like, then go look at how many kids are in prison with single moms. If toxic masculinity is so bad. Right. Can we go on another second here? Because there's a great story that relates to the animal kingdom with this.
Sure.
I was talking to someone the other day telling me in Africa, they had a problem at one of the safari areas with a bunch of teenage male elephants, and they get into this season. It's called Muska, I think, by the Dutch Afrikaans, but it's basically onset of puberty with the teenage elephants, right? And they get this musk scent thing leaks out. Well, they were terrorizing all the other animals in the, I can't think of the term, like Kruger, what is it, national park. They were terrorizing all the other animals and they were goring rhinos and hippopotamus and wreaking havoc, right, with all the other animals. And they're sitting there wondering do we have to euthanize the guys or send them to zoos or whatever? And one of the old game wardens said, get some old bull elephants from one of the other parks and bring them here. and they brought 2 bull elephants in, and they slapped the teenagers into line within a week, right? Like male dogs. I know you've got dogs, right? Male dogs with puppies, right? They correct them. When they get out of line, they get bitten across the nose, or they get growled at, or belly, knocked on their ass and stood over. And it's the educational beat down, right? That's out of line, Junior. We don't tolerate that shit. And that's what these bull elephants did. And the teenagers all fell into line. We have, again, a society now where a lot of these guys, the dad's not there. He's gone. Right. So who's telling these boys what's right and what's wrong anymore? Nobody. And now we see disproportionate levels of violence. Someone, this kid killed someone. I'm watching a gangbanger interviewed. You killed him. Why? He dissed me. Right? Inappropriate, again, level of response for what? Because no male was in that environment to say that's an inappropriate level of response for someone calling you a name. Right? Yeah. So again, I don't know where this is going to end up. Yeah. It's we have pendulums that swing back and forth. I'm just hoping now we reach a point where we realize, this is unsustainable. We're going to have to start going back the other way.
Times have changed. I want to share something. I want to say hello to a couple people. Eric said, howdy from Columbus. Thank you, Eric. And Eric said, great topic and content. Appreciate that. Tobacco Rose said, hey, Alan, and also said, I have 2 videos of my grandkids in fights after school, high school, but I live in Kansas. It's normal here.
Yeah, country boys.
A real quick story you sort of remind me of. When I was in 8th grade, we moved from North Dakota. My dad retired from the Air Force. We moved to Montana. So I was a brand new kid at Thompson Falls, middle school. And one of the teachers there, when kids got, in a beef or whatever, at lunch, he brought them in, put boxing gloves on them, and let them go. I mean, you could never do that today.
Where the school I went to, we had a guy called Lenny Elwell, ex-military guy, badass. He was the school proctor. And if he caught you fighting, that's exactly what you did. He said, be at the boxing club at lunchtime.
And it was funny because there was a tough guy, Matt. He wanted to fight somebody. Nobody wanted to fight him.
Yep.
And I was like, I will. I'm the new kid. Shit, what the hell, So we put on the gloves. We beat the hell out of each other. Nobody really won. We both took some good shots and gave some good shots. But then all of a sudden, the word went out. That new guy, he took on Matt, and then it elevated me that, hey, nobody's going to mess with me now.
99 times out of 100, and I'm not making that number up, I'm only aware of one instance where the kids weren't friends afterwards.
Yeah.
They would go into that ring and wail for 3 minutes. He made them shake hands. 99 times they became best mates. You'd see them walking around school together, right? And that was part of it. You had to step up. I remember when I applied for Dennis Martin's bodyguard school, one of the was, have you ever been charged, right? Not convicted. Have you ever been charged with assault? And I had been as a bouncer, right? It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I got an assault charge. And I called him and I said, is that going to disqualify me? And he said, no. On the other hand, he said, that's a bonus. And I went, really? And he said, yeah, it tells us you're not afraid to get stuck in. Yep. He said, you're an unknown entity otherwise, because no one knows when bullets start flying, right? Is this guy going to step in? And if you look at the English, it's the parachute regiment, right, with their milling. And they take these kids, they put boxing gloves, they stand them toe to toe in this really tight circle. There's no backing up. And they blow a whistle, and these guys have to wail on each other. They're not looking for skills. They're looking for heart. Right. And that guy's got to stand there, and they get bloody noses. They get rocked. They get, they're standing there woozy. Some of them get knocked out. And when they wake up, they're expected to go right back in and finish their 2 minutes. And those instructors are basing that fortitude of that guy on where he's going to be sent after he graduates out of P Company. So if he doesn't fight hard, he's probably going to end up being a mechanic or packing parachutes or working in the kitchen. If he stands there toe to toe, that tells them that he will run into bullets. Like, he'll face down enemy gunfire and he won't flinch. And that's literally their yardstick for determining who gets sent into combat and who doesn't. And it's that simple. Put gloves on, stand toe to toe, slug it out, see who's got it and see who doesn't. And, you know, and we've taken that away from all of our kids growing up, which we sit there wondering why we've got such a bunch of wusses now, right? And that's part of the problem.
No, I agree. And, you know, we've went a little bit longer. We got off on a sidetrack, but it's all great stuff, Nick. But I think we should probably wrap this up. Maybe we'll just have to do it again, because I think we could probably go on all day telling good stories and some good information.
I'm sure we could.
But I do want to remind people, Nick's book, How to Be a Bodyguard, is on Amazon. If you don't have this in your safety self-defense library, you ought to get it. I mean, has a lot of great information.
Don't forget to let them know if they want to know how to do that hold properly and all the legal ramifications. I've got that on that online video course.
Where can I get that course, Nick? Where can I get that one?
Warriors Krav Online. And again, I'll put a link to it in the thing with that study from Wake Forest.
Yep. So check out that online course too. A lot of good stuff, especially if you're working in the field. If you're working as a bodyguard, you're working in security, those kind of things, check out Nick's.
Well, mate, I'd actually say every martial artist, because my problem with this is, essentially in the developed world, we have two codes of justice. There's Napoleonic code, which is prevalent in Europe, and then you have the Westminster system of justice, which our legal system here is based on. And a stipulation or a requirement of that law when it comes to self-defense, one of the blanket things you should be following is you should use the minimum amount of force to resolve a situation, right? And if you do that, the chances of you being convicted of something in a court of law is reduced massively. Well, if I can put a bear hug on someone, or a full Nelson, or a sleeper, or a reverse Nelson, a wrist lock, a come along, and resolve the situation, or my alternative is I punch the guy and knock him out, a savvy prosecutor will tie you up in court because did you use the minimum amount of force, right? If you punched him or kicked him when you could.
Very good point.
Yeah. So every martial artist should be learning that stuff.
No, I agree. And part of it is, I guess, I forget that in Hapkido, we learn all that stuff, but not every martial art.
Oh, God, no. Taekwondo doesn't, karate doesn't, Aikido, none of them. It's only arts like Hapkido. Aikido's got the old Japanese jiu-jitsu's got a ton of it. It's where all my stuff came from. Yep. But yeah, the stuff they're doing now, the Taekwondo, the kickboxing, no, they don't have it. They don't teach that at all.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining and saying hello. I appreciate the comments from people. Nick, thank you for joining today. It's been great. We'll have to do it again. And I just want everybody to go out and make it a fantastic Friday the 13th. Beware of Jason out there tonight, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, brother. See you later.